What is up, guys? Welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about everything switchgrass. Now, the biggest thing with switchgrass is that it does take a long time to fully get it established. I'm talking like 2+ years before you're gonna see that nice, tall, thick stand of screening that you're going for when you plant something like switchgrass. Now, I'm gonna try to focus more on using switchgrass as a screen than as using it for like bedding area or cover in this video. But what I want to get into is the planting time, how you care for it, what you need to be doing year 1 and 2 and beyond so that you make sure you get that good stand of switchgrass. And now, guys, when you're talking about switchgrass, there's so many variables and so many things in play that I do highly recommend, watch this video fully all the way through so that you get all the information. Watch my other switchgrass videos, but go watch the switchgrass videos by the other creators too, because we all kind of talk about the same information, but we all present it a little bit differently. We might articulate it a little bit differently. You might hear something that one of us says a certain way easier than what somebody else says. So, go watch all of the switchgrass videos out there, because this is something that takes 2+ years to get fully established. You don't want to make a mistake that costs you a year or 2. So make sure you're spraying at the right time, make sure you're seeding at the right time, make sure you're mowing at the right time, and just make sure you're taking care of that switchgrass. Now, switchgrass can be a lot of work. It can also just be a lot of luck too. So it's actually the two things you want to put together in order to get a good stand of switch. Now, let me kind of explain what I mean by that. Now, I planted switchgrass out here on this food plot last year. This food plot is going into its 2nd season, so it's relatively new, and I wanted to put screening around it. So one of the first things I did last year in about March or April was I cut back all of the red osier dogwood and box elder that are on the edges here, not kill them back, but just trimmed them back so that I would get that regenerative growth. But then I planted switchgrass in front of them in order to get that feathered edge that leads off of the food plot and into the woods. Also, that red osier dogwood is going to lose its leaves later in the season, and that switchgrass will remain as a screen to the food plot at that later part of the season. Now, I also have the other end of the plot that is just open into a hayfield, and that is an area where I wanted to establish screening as well with switchgrass so that I can keep the food plot as the safe and secure area for the deer to come out to in the daylight and feed on. So what I did was I, of course, seeded everything, and it was either like March or April, which could be a little late. You would ideally want to frost seed, but I didn't have the opportunity because that's when I was just getting started out here. So I wanted to get my switchgrass seed down as soon as possible. So it is okay to seed in like March or April. It would even be okay to seed now too, but you're just kind of behind the ball on that one. It's going to take it a little longer to get started. You're going to have a lot more competition with your native weeds and grasses this time of year. But basically, if you're starting switchgrass, there is no time like the present to get the seed down. Get a good weed-free seed bed, get it down and get it growing, because it takes, like I said, 2 years to really get it established. And so if you were at this time of year, the beginning of June, I would hate to tell you that you have to wait till December to frost seed it and then start your first year next year, when you could at least try to establish a little bit of a root base this year. You're not going to have much growth this year if you were to seed right now, but the sooner the better when it comes to switchgrass, because like I said, it is going to take you 2 years. And how switchgrass grows is that first year, you're just establishing a root base. So my switchgrass out here last year did not do that great. We had, what I was saying earlier, bad luck. We had a drought. We got very little rain, and the switchgrass only ended up growing about 12 inches. Maybe some areas where there were low areas that held water a little better, they grew a little bit more than that. But for the most part, I only got about 12 inches of growth out of it. And you can see down in here, you can still see kind of some of the old switch that's getting pushed out by the switch that's coming up this year out of that root system. And the stuff this year is already twice as tall as the stuff got all of last year. So that's sort of that like first year of building a root system so that the second year it can really take off because those roots are already established. We've also had a lot better precipitation this year and just a lot better weather in general. So the switchgrass is doing a lot better now. But going back to the beginning, if you do have the opportunity, yes, frost seed that switchgrass, because the seed needs to go through a stratification process. And what that means is it needs to go through that constant freeze thaw of a winter into spring cycle, and the moisture that it gets from like the snow melting or the frost coming out of the ground, that really helps to get that seed ready to germinate. And so once you get into the spring, almost all the seed that you've thrown down will germinate. But we need to make sure that that seed, when it's trying to establish its root base at the beginning of the year, that it has no competition from other weeds or grasses, because they will outcompete it and they will choke it out because that switch has not established its root base yet. So what I'm talking about with that is you are going to want to spray something like Simazine, which is a pre-emergent, and now that can get real tricky. So spraying Simazine, you would not want to spray it the day before spring green up. You would want to spray it maybe a few days before spring green up. So it gets really difficult to predict when exactly that would be. But I'll let you in on a little hint of what I do. So I look at the 10-day forecast, just like you would if you were going to hunt and you were trying to hunt a front or whatever coming through. Look at that too, in a way to know when to plant or when to spray as well. So this year was almost foolproof. We had here in southeastern Wisconsin a bunch of days that were like 40 to 50 degrees. So it went from that and then jumped to like 70 to 80 degrees for a week. And you could predict that as soon as we hit those warm days, everything greened up, every stem out here budded and leafed out in that 1 week. So I would have sprayed that Simazine in that cold week before we had that warm week, and that would have been the last chance I had to get Simazine down. Now, if you don't want to spray Simazine, or maybe you got behind, or you also still had some weeds and stuff come up, which is most likely going to be the case anyway, what you can do is you can spray glyphosate before your switchgrass germinates. So this is after spring green up, but before your switchgrass germinates. And your switchgrass is going to germinate when your soil temperature is around 50 to 55 degrees, or like when the corn is coming up in the farmer's fields. So how, again, I predict that is, again, I look at that 10-day forecast, and if we're having nighttime lows down in the 30s and daytime highs in like the 60s, that soil temperature is not going to get to 50 to 55 degrees. But if we're having nighttime lows in like the 50s and then daytime highs in the 70s or 80s, you can bet that that soil temperature is going to hit 50 to 55 degrees. So do not spray your glyphosate after that. So again, you want to watch that weather, and you're looking for like the averages over a 10-day period. Just because you have one warm day surrounded by a bunch of cold days, that's not going to be enough to get it to pop up. So you're just looking for the overall averages. And like I said, this year it was almost foolproof. It was just so perfectly cold to perfectly warm that you could see right where that line was going to be. Every year is not going to be like that. So you just have to use your best guess, and then also just come out and look. Like switchgrass, once you know what you're looking for, is pretty easy to identify. Its stem is like a reddish purple, so it's easy to figure out what is switchgrass and what isn't. That first year it's going to be a little bit more difficult. That second year is going to be super easy because you're still going to have the old switchgrass from last year standing, and the new stuff's going to come out of that same root system. So it's super easy to see that old growth, new growth, same root system. That's your switchgrass. So, all right, you get that last spraying of glyphosate down, which I did out here, and there's still a bunch of weeds coming up in the switchgrass. Well, the cool thing though is that this switchgrass is for the most part out competing a lot of these weeds, but some of these more broadleaf weeds are starting to grow out and expand their leaves, and it's going to start to choke out the switchgrass. So that's when it's a good time to mow. So I would recommend mowing about this time of year, the beginning of June, and then again in maybe a month, and then again a third time. I would mow about a week before I would plan my fall planting for my food plot. Now here in southeastern Wisconsin, I'm gonna plant the food plot probably mid to late August, like the second or third week of August. So that means that first or second week of August will probably be my last mowing, if not the end of July. We'll just have to keep an eye on it, and you can kind of just look and see how the weeds are doing in the switchgrass, because once you get these weeds knocked back, a lot of these weeds are going to just die as soon as you cut the tops off of them. And you do want to mow them at like 6 to 8 inches. You don't want to like mow it like your lawn. But when you cut the tops off of these bigger weeds, it'll straight up kill them off. And all you're doing with the switchgrass is just nicking the tops off just like you would with your lawn, and it grows right back. And so what'll eventually happen after doing that, those 2 or 3 times a year, is you're gonna completely kill all of the weeds, but the switchgrass is just gonna boom, and you're gonna give it that time that like your food plot has to grow for the switchgrass to grow as well, and it'll be completely established. You'll have it completely, I shouldn't say completely weed-free, but you'll have it fairly weed-free at that point, and it'll really be the thing that's out competing the weeds and choking the weeds off at that time. Now, this is second year switch. With first year switch, you got to keep like an eye on that as well, and I'll show you guys what I have going on over there too. And like I said, I did seed switch over there, but we had such a bad drought that stuff just did not grow. I got a little bit of it to grow, but I frost seeded again last year. So I'm basically considering that first year switch over there and this second year switch over here, even though they were originally seeded at the same time. I just got more production out of this the first year than I did out of that because of that drought. But I'll show you over there, right now my switchgrass is out competing all of the crabgrass that's growing in there, so I'm not too worried about mowing that right now, but that is something, again, that I'll want to keep an eye on. Right now I'm going to just let that switch grow and let it fill in because it is first year. I don't really want to mow it at this time because, like I said, if a lot of it is first year, it's still working on building that root system, and I don't want to accidentally like pull it out or whatever. I want it to just, as long as it's not being out competed by weeds, just let that grow. I'll come in here and mow this stuff instead. And it's sort of like you're going to have to kind of learn of like when to mow, when not to mow, rather than just scheduling it and doing it. Like, just take a look and see what your weeds look like inside your switch. Is your switch out competing your weeds, or are your weeds out competing your switch? If the weeds are winning, time to mow. If the switch is winning, give it another week and check on it again. All right, so you mow, your switch comes up. It's gonna get as big as it's gonna get that year, depending on how well you took care of it, how weed-free you got it, and then of course, how lucky you got with the weather. That first year, you could expect maybe 2 to 3 feet of growth if everything went perfectly for you. Like I said, I only got a foot of growth out of this stuff last year because I did not have everything go perfectly for me. But second year, like I said, this stuff's already almost twice as tall as it got all of last year. So I would expect for this stuff to get to be a decent screen this year. I would expect it to be even better year 3 though. As long as you continue to take care of it, you got to get those weeds out of it. That's the one thing that's going to take out your switch, is like letting it go and letting the weeds slowly but surely choke it out and start winning over the switchgrass. If you can keep giving your switchgrass every advantage to take the advantage over those other weeds, you're going to have a beautiful stand of switch for years to come. Now, once you take your first year switch into year 2, there's not a whole lot to do. Just let it go into the winter. If you're still not quite sure at that time of year what exactly was switch or what wasn't, it'll be very obvious that time of year. It'll be the only thing standing in the winter. It's to spring now. It's still like standing a little bit. The new growth is starting to push the old growth to the ground, but it's actually a very good habitat grass for that because it gives cover year round, to the point that the old stuff stays standing until the new stuff pushes it down. And so in that first year of establishing your switchgrass, you might want to plant something else for a screen if you really need it there. So what I'm doing here is, in this corner of the food plot over here, I have a few rows of corn planted, and that's there just to help screen for 1 year until that switchgrass can get established. Now, you do not typically want to use something like corn as a screen because you don't want to use food as a screen. But in this case, that corner of the food plot would have been food anyway. I'm just putting corn there instead of whatever else I would be planting in my food plot. I'll be able to shoot the edges of the corn from the stand. It's not a worry to me that the deer are going to somehow relate to that differently. It's just going to give me that little bit of screen on the edge of the plot before the switchgrass. So it'll be food plot, corn, switchgrass, and so on, so that I'm actually just adding to my screen for that 1 year temporarily, so that I can let that switchgrass get established but still take advantage of having a screen there this year. And now, what is switchgrass good for? So I know a lot of us know what it's good for, and we just wanted more of the specifics of like how to get it to become that awesome screen. But it is awesome to screen your food plots because deer like to feel safe and secure while they're on those food plots so that they can't see out and nothing else can see in. The grass is also awesome for screening things like your hunter access. Anywhere that you do not want the deer to see you, put up some switchgrass in that area. And anywhere you don't want the deer to see each other, or where you want them to feel safe and secure inside a bubble like on a food plot, go ahead and put some switchgrass there. It's just so effective that way. Plus it does provide cover for things like upland game birds and rabbits and stuff too. It's just an awesome habitat grass to get out on your property to screen or to feather or to edge certain attractions like a food plot. All right, if you guys felt like you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you guys on the next one.